Isaiah 58 verses 1 to 12. So I'll just give you a couple of moments to find that if you'd like to before I start. Okay, Isaiah 58 verses 1 to 12. Shout it aloud, do not hold back. Raise your voice like a trumpet. Declare to my people their rebellion, and to the house of Jacob their sins. For day after day they seek me out. They seem eager to know my ways, as if they were a nation that does what is right and has not forsaken the commands of its God. They ask me for just decisions and seem eager for God to come near them. Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen it? Why have we humbled ourselves and you have not noticed? Yet on the day of your fasting, you do as you please and exploit all your workers. Your fasting ends in quarrelling and strife, and in striking each other with wicked fists. You cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. Is this the kind of fast I have chosen, only a day for a man to humble himself? Is it only for bowing one's head like a reed and for lying on sackcloth and ashes? Is that what you call a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen, to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe him, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood. Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, "Here am I." If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and malicious talk, and if you spend yourselves in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land and will strengthen your frame. You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. Your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations. You will be called repairer of broken walls, restorer of streets with dwellings. Okay, so I found this a really, really interesting and challenging passage, and my thoughts on it are still developing and evolving. But I think a couple of things that I just wanted to bring out quickly. I found the first verse particularly very confronting with "shout it aloud, do not hold back." And I'm just going to leave this question here, and this is something that I find very challenging as well, but thinking about how often do we shout and how often do we hold back? Shout it aloud, do not hold back. I also thought a question that sort of came to my mind as I was reading this passage was, when we're inside, how can we reach outside? So there's quite a focus in this passage on fasting and this idea of the personal fast compared to the collective fast. So in verse 5, it says, "Is this the kind of fast I have chosen, only a day for a man to humble himself?" And we have this interesting distinction between this sort of personal journey and this personal fast, which in some ways seems to be criticized, as we're called to a wider, bigger fast to loose the chains of injustice in verse 6. And I thought this was a really interesting thing to link to the current context, linking to this idea of personal isolation and collective responsibility during the virus. When we're inside, how can we reach outside? How can we look beyond our bedroom windows? And I think the obvious thing is prayer. That can always transcend any room, which is fantastic. But I think thinking about it as we head into another thrilling national lockdown, thinking about communication and listening and conversation, and thinking about our Just Love families and what we can do on there. This is a real time where we might be inside a lot, but there's a lot of conversation that can take place, and a lot of planning and online events that we can potentially do. And Just Love families, I think, are a great way to start with that. How can we sort of use that platform to pray together and connect together and see what we can create both in those families and as a bigger unit. But I do think that listening and conversation, two things that we can actually do online and on the iconic vibe that is Zoom, can really sort of carry us a long way, and conversations can spark really amazing action. So conversation and listening really came to mind there. And then the other question that I just wanted to bring out was, how can we be abundant in a time of limitation? How can we be abundant in a time of limitation? So in this passage, there's lots of talk about looking after the hungry and giving the poor wanderer a place to stay. And if we do that, then the Bible says we will be like a spring whose waters never fail, in verse 11. And I thought this was really interesting, this sense of abundance in the midst of chaos, in the midst of hunger and oppression and sadness. And it made me think about those images that we see often on Instagram at the moment of the cleared shelves in shops, the stripping of the pasta shelves, the bread shelves, the hand sanitizer, and the toilet roll, which also seems to be a key thing that goes. And thinking about this stripping away, this lack of resources, this lack of sort of ability to be able to connect in such a public way, and thinking about how can we be abundant in a time of limitation. And I think that that's really difficult. We're trying to be abundant and steadfast in a time that changes every day, because obviously we don't know when we're going to be inside, when we're going to be outside, what's happening. And I think three things that came to my mind thinking about what things that are always abundant are trust, love, and hope. And I think there are many other things, but I think considering trust, love, and hope in this chaotic time, and where can we take those? And again, that might start from a Just Love family, it might start from a prayer, but I think remembering what is abundant in a world that changes all the time can really equip us to step forward and make a change. And so finally, I'll bring back again to that first verse: shout it aloud, do not hold back. The confronting and amazing challenge, and something that I think a lot about. But how often do we shout, and how often do we hold back? Thank you.
Great, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Miriam. So yeah, now we're going to listen to a podcast, and actually I found it very helpful. It's the last of a series of podcasts, but I picked it because it summarizes it quite well, and it's only 20 minutes long. But I would really recommend listening to this series of podcasts. It's called Simplicity, I think, and I think this is a really relevant topic for us as Christians, as humans, and just considering the current cultural climate that we're in. I'd really like us to spend this time thinking about, what do we actually need? Where are we getting our fulfillment from? Where do we think our contentment comes from? Because all of this links to the idea of sustainable consumption, which sustainable consumption isn't just, are we buying ethically, but also what's our attitude to buying? Are we buying too much? Do we need everything that we're buying? Are we trying to fill a void? And should that void actually be filled with Christ rather than, I don't know, clothes? Like, I'm guilty as charged. I've been trying this year to not buy anything until the end of the year. And I just really recommend to challenge yourself and to really think about it. And I think we should all be ready to feel convicted, and also to bear in mind that following Christ is costly, and that it does mean denying yourself, even if it's denying yourself things. also think it's really relevant because we're now all about to be stuck indoors, and we're going to be bored, and we're going to feel like we've got plus money to spend, and we're all just going to think, oh, I'll just order a bunch of stuff online, and we don't need it. Like, what? I think, yeah, just try and use this time to kind of challenge yourself. So yeah, the podcast we'll listen to, and then we'll have a nice period of discussion. There'll be some questions. Yeah, cool. And look at different Bible passages, which is also really helpful to kind of ground you in scripture. But yeah, that's just a little taster to hopefully get you guys thinking. I have just sent some questions in the chat, and yeah, we'll just go into breakout rooms and have what's the name of the podcast? Simplicity by Bridgetown Church. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, we'll just go into breakout rooms, have a chat about what this means, and just kind of applying it a bit to our lives. Cool. I think I'd recommend listening to the rest of the podcast. I don't know if there are any other notices. I don't usually do this part, so
I have a little notice. We are opening exec nominations for next year today, which feels very early, but we actually want to like do handover really well, and so want to have lots of time to like pray and consider and think about it. So there's going to be a Google form that I'll put in the chat in 2 seconds time, and basically like write down who you think might be good. Like, only nominate people that are going to be around next year, because otherwise, as much as we'd love to hear about how great people that are graduating are, it's not going to help us in making decisions. So yeah, please do be nominating people. Nominate yourself. Like, if you're like, yeah, I really actually want to do this role or want to be on exec, like, there's absolutely no reason that you can't nominate yourself, and we really want to like have people that really are passionate about doing it. So we're very happy for self-nominations, basically. We're going to share the like form here, and we'll also share it on like families and on the Facebook pages and stuff. So do be sending in lots of nominations. You can send in multiple ones, and yeah, we just want to make sure that we hand this over really well, and that we have an exec that is really passionate and yeah, loving of Jesus and justice next year. Hence why we're starting so early. Please don't be overwhelmed by the fact that it's so early, but yeah, I think it's been sent. Brilliant. That's all I had to say. Great. This has been really fab. Thank you, Eva, for leading and finding the podcast. Thank you, Miriam, for the Bible thought. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah. See you.